outline here. We're not going to be spending a lot of time inside of Dubsado. We'll talk about a few things, but this is going to be a lot about talking about process and how you can actually build and plan out your workflows effectively. So how to plan out workflows in Dubsado. There are some important tips that I want to share with you before we jump in and get started today. And these are very important, and really take these in and understand these, because I'm telling you, if you get these in, it's going to help you out a lot whenever you get to your workflow. It'll take away some of the stress, and it'll make you feel a lot more confident when you're getting into your workflow building. So the first thing, number one, your business process that you have is your workflow. So if you're brand new to business and you don't have a business process yet, you're not really sure how you want to run your business, you cannot build a workflow. And I know that sounds kind of abrasive, but it is very true that your workflow literally is your business process. So when you have a new client that comes in and you send them out a welcome email and you send them a questionnaire, send them a contract, that flow, that business process, that is your workflow. So if you don't have one of those, you're not able to build a workflow. So if you're brand new to business and you don't have a business process, spend some time researching your industry and see what normal business practices may look like. Do you normally do contracts? How do you want to do payments? How are you going to communicate with the client? Through email? Are you going to call them? Start to go through and just kind of formulate the different things that you want to do in your business process, and that will help you kind of develop that process as well. So that's number one, your business process is your workflow. As detailed or vague as that is, that's what your workflow is. And number two, your workflow will only be as effective as your knowledge in Dubsado. And this is a very, very important point. So I'm going to kind of hit a little bit more on this. So what I mean by that is that if you're not sure how Dubsado works, it's almost impossible to build a great workflow, because the workflow is really just an expression of the knowledge of what you have in Dubsado. So a perfect example is there are some times where someone will hire somebody to build a workflow for them. And they will have this elaborate workflow, and it might be 40 actions long, and it has all of this optimization and it's streamlined. And then they'll give it to the person who doesn't have a strong knowledge of Dubsado, and they'll have no idea how to use it. And so they'll have this really effective, great workflow, but if the knowledge isn't there on how to use Dubsado, it's really hard to have a workflow that works for you if you're not sure how Dubsado works. So that's also number two. If you're not familiar with the Dubsado system and you're not comfortable with it, spend some time testing things out and getting to know how Dubsado works before jumping into workflows, because your workflow will only be as effective as your knowledge of Dubsado. So definitely hit home on that and spend some time studying how Dubsado works if you haven't yet. Number three, every user's workflow will be different. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all workflow, and I'll give an example for that too. So doing one-on-one calls with Dubsado users, I talk to a lot of different industries. I talk to people in photography, people in cake decorating, people in design, web design, all of that. And I've never talked to two photographers who have the same workflow. And this is what I mean by that. So you might have a photographer who they want everything to be 100% automated. They don't want to put their hands on anything. They want it to be every email is just automated, sends out, and they don't have to touch anything. You could have the same person who has the exact same workflow, but they want to have their hands on everything. So they'll have approve buttons on things, and they'll want to do more manual work, and they want to make sure they put that personal touch on everything before they send it out to the client. So same workflow, but it could be set up completely differently based off of what this person needs and how their lifestyle works versus the other person. So when you're building your workflows, just know that there's not a one size fits all. There's not this is the right way to build a workflow. Everybody's is going to be completely different. And that's okay, because your workflow is your business process, and everybody's business is different as well. So when you're building your workflow, don't get stuck on, is this, the one way that photographers do workflows? That's not really a thing. Everybody's is completely different. And number 4, the last thing really quick before we get into our points, is your workflow is a living process. It will change a lot, and that's okay. And this is what I mean by that. When you build your first workflow, you're going to have a certain set of actions that you're going to have set up. When Dubsado introduces new features into the system, your workflow will then change because you'll want to take those new features and add them into your workflow. Perfect example is the scheduler. Once we introduced our scheduler into Dubsado, then all of a sudden people had to go in and they had to edit their workflows and change them around to affect that new scheduler feature. So your workflow is always going to be a living process. It's going to grow. As your business grows, your workflow will also grow as well, and it will change and shift. Maybe you're starting out very, very small and you're okay with doing everything manually, and then eventually you get so much business that you have to start making things more automated, so you have to change up your workflow. So just know that when you're building your workflow, it's not going to be a perfect, I set this and I never touch it again and I never have to edit it or change it. Your workflow is a living process, so it's always going to be moving. You might realize you want to add more emails in or add more tasks in or make this more automated, make this more manual. So never get stuck on, I need to make a perfect workflow on the first time, because it literally does not exist. So that should kind of give you a sense of relief that you don't have to go in and make this perfect workflow. Your workflow is always going to be changing and evolving as you grow and as Dubsado grows. So that's okay if it changes a lot. So take those 4 things. Those are really good, important tips before you start getting into everything, to kind of relieve yourself a little bit. And then also know that you do need to study a little bit on how Dubsado works. So awesome. Well, let's jump into our first point here, and we're going to start at the beginning. So when we're talking about your business process, your workflow, that means that it's going to be your process from initiation, when they first come into Dubsado, to completion, so the very end. So when you're thinking about your workflow and when you're planning things out and say, okay, I want to sit down and I want to plan out my workflow, you want to start at the beginning. What is the very first thing that happens when someone comes into Dubsado? That's the initiation portion, all the way into completion. When that project, that job, that event is over, what is that whole stretch of items that you do in that time frame, those action steps that you do? That's what your workflow is going to be. You do have the ability to start a workflow halfway through your process. If you wanted to build a workflow that starts midway, you can do that. But to use Dubsado to its maximum potential, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second, it's really best to think about initiation to completion. That's a great way to get the full scope of what you're trying to do. So the next thing we're going to talk about, because we're talking about starting at the beginning, is how do workflows start in Dubsado? How do we even get to the point where you can add in a workflow? So what you can do is you want to start with the lead capture form. The lead capture form in Dubsado is responsible for initiating people into the system. And so let's jump into Dubsado here. And I'm underneath templates and forms, and I'm in the lead capture form. If you're not familiar with Dubsado, the lead capture form is going to be the form that you can embed on your website. It's the form that you can share with people. And once someone fills this form out, it creates them as a new project in Dubsado. So basic functionality with this form is to create a new project in Dubsado, and workflows run inside of projects. So you want to have that project created so that way the workflow can run in there. So with this form, the first thing we're going to talk about is sharing this form. So with this form, once you build it and you ask the questions that you would typically ask on a contact form, get their information, you can share this form in 2 different ways. The first way is if we click the share button up here, we'll open that up. It's in the top right-hand corner there. There's 2 ways that you can share this form. The first way is by copying and pasting this frame code into your web builder. So this is how you would embed the form on your website. You can just take this and you can highlight the text and copy it, and then you can paste that into your Wix, into your Squarespace, WordPress, and then that's going to embed the form on your website. So people can come to the form, they can fill it out, and then that will create a new project in Dubsado. The other way is we have what's called the direct link. And this right here, you can basically copy that and paste that anywhere. So if you want it on Facebook, if you want it on your Instagram bio, on LinkedIn, if you want it in the email signature of your emails, you could text it to somebody. There's so many different ways that you can use this. I've seen other people as well. They've actually taken this link and they've bookmarked it on their own computer and then used the lead capture form as more of an internal lead capture form. So they just have it saved on their computer. And then if they receive a phone call, if they get a lot of cold emails, they can just fill out the form as if they're the client. And then that will basically do the exact same thing. It'll create that project. And then you can also start workflows as well. So it's important to know how you're going to share your lead capture. Are you embedding it on your website? Do you have different pages where you want different lead capture forms? Do you want a specific lead capture for Facebook and a specific one for LinkedIn? Planning out how many different lead captures you need first is very, very important. Where are people going to be coming in and filling out this form? Plan that out first. And then beyond sharing this form, the next thing that we're going to talk about is how workflows start from this form. So not only does this form get people into this system, it initiates them, but you can also start workflows in the projects that get created from this form. So we'll talk about both of those different ways. The first way is up here at the top where you see the form tab. That's going to be where you can edit the form, but then we also have the settings tab right next to it. The first thing that you'll see here is the default workflow. And the default workflow means that any workflow template that you have, and I have 1,000 in here from different webinars, but whatever workflow you apply to this drop down, that means that anybody who fills out this form, it's going to start the exact same workflow going in that project for everybody. So if you're in a business where everyone who fills out this particular work or this particular lead capture, you want that same process to generate, you're going to add that to the default workflow area. So that means anyone who comes in, they fill this out, they get the exact same workflow. That same process begins from this form. So you have the default workflow method. The other method that you have is by actually putting a question on the form and then having somebody answer a certain question and having a different workflow take off based off of that answer. So what we have is called the workflow element, which is this little circle icon in the elements chart over here. So I have one on the form right now already that says, what service are you interested in? And when you click on this, what it allows you to do is to put different answers on this question and then have a different workflow take off based off of what they choose. So this is where you really have to think about your business. Do you have different services or different types of business that you offer, different events that you do, or different, in this case, it's different types of coaching, business coaching, group coaching, personal coaching. So this is where you can kind of get a little bit of variety in what workflow is going to start. As far as conditional logic goes, this is kind of the extent of what we have right now, but we are going to be adding in more conditional logic into the system later. But right now, this is where you can actually get them set on the right path. So what you would do in this situation is you would end up having 3 different workflows. You would have one for business, one for group coaching, and one for personal coaching. And then you can come in here and you can add in. So if we do like business coaching, we would have that workflow start if they click that answer. If you wanted to put in your group coaching workflow, that would go there. So you can kind of see that this is where you can get people set on the right path based off of what they're interested in. So planning this out too as well will help you out, because you don't want to go in and build workflows right from the start and then realize that this is how workflows begin and then have to go in and change all the workflows that you built. So if you're at the stage where you haven't touched workflows yet, do this portion first and kind of plan out the framework for how you want your workflows to go. And that's going to help you out tremendously whenever you actually build your workflow, because you'll have a plan and you'll have, okay, I'm going to have 3 workflows. It's going to be these 3. So I'll start with this one and build this one out. So make sure that you kind of start with the lead capture form, understand how workflows are going to begin in the system. And so that's why in our outline here, we kind of start at the beginning, because it's the best place to start with workflows is how they're actually going to take off. Now, one thing that you need to know, and we'll talk through a couple of these, is that you can have multiple lead captures with multiple workflow options. So planning this out is going to help you out a lot. And I'll give you some examples. You could just have one website lead capture with the workflow element similar to this. Let's say this is my only lead capture form that I have anywhere, and it has the workflow element tool on it, and the different workflows are going to start from that point. You can do that as an option. You could also have it set up where you have 4 different lead captures. So I have a business coaching lead capture. I have a one-on-one coaching lead capture, a group coaching lead capture, because they're all on different pages on my website. Maybe that's how your website is set up. In that case, you would do a default workflow for each one of those instead of doing the workflow element. So that's a possibility. It all depends on how your website is set up. You could also have just a specific Facebook lead capture form that has its own workflow that starts from it, and just do a default workflow for that Facebook lead capture. You can have an internal lead capture that's a little bit different, that might have different workflows. So the first thing to do before going in and building your workflow is plan out your lead captures and what workflows are going to start from each one. You don't need to necessarily go in and build anything, but just write down on a sheet of paper, I need these different lead captures, and these are the different workflows that are going to start from them. So that's number 1, plan out how you want those to start. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys about the different ways that workflows can start in the system. And now the next thing that we're going to do, so let's say we have everything planned out and we know these 3 workflows are going to start from this form. I have a default workflow on this form. The next thing you're going to do is write out your process. So you're going to write out what happens for each one of those workflows that are going to start. So for example, if we're looking at the lead capture that I have set up here, if I'm a coach, let's say, and I have my different coaching options, and I'll just get rid of these here because this is what it would essentially look like. What I would do now is I would go on a scratch piece of paper. I would go grab some sticky notes, or there's a bunch of different softwares online, free softwares where you can build flowcharts and all of that if you like, if that's kind of your vibe. What I would do is I would go in and I would say, okay, business coaching. If someone comes to my lead capture form and they click business coaching, what happens? And if you don't know what happens, this is the perfect time to start to develop your process. If you do know what happens, it's best to write it out. And I'll explain why here in a little bit, why writing it out really helps. So if they say business coaching, so I know that once they click business coaching, I want to send them an email thanking them. Then maybe I want to send out a scheduler template to get on the phone with them. And then I have maybe a quote or a proposal that I send out, a contract they need to sign, and then I need them to put money down. I have an intake form they need to fill out or something like that. Whenever you have your process in your head, what you'll do is you'll actually write out everything that happens in that business coaching workflow. And I would do the exact same thing for group coaching and personal coaching. Any workflows that are set to start from a lead capture, write out the steps that happen. And that's going to help you develop your action items when you get into a workflow. So one thing I want to show you really quickly, so you're understanding kind of what the workflow will end up looking like. If I go to a workflow right now, and I'll just take this workflow here. So this workflow, as you can see, this is what your workflow is going to end up being. It's going to be a list of actions that are written out step by step. So if you have those written, as you can see, when you're building this, you'll have a guideline on what steps you need to build at what point in time. So our workflows are linear. So you're going to write out your action steps in the order of how you want things to go. So you're eventually going to have in this case, 3 of these. You would have, one for business, one for group, and one for personal coaching. So that's going to be the next step that you would do, is to go in and write out your processes. Now, some people might say, I don't really know what my business process is. I'm not really sure. I'm brand new to business. I have a couple things here that are going to really help you out. And this is in a help article. My colleague Sam actually wrote a help article in Dubsado, so you can look this up on your own as well. It's called Writing Out Your Process. And if you go to help.dubsado.com, you can jump on this help article, and you can look in more detail of what she wrote out. But it's a great help article to kind of help get you on the right track for writing out your process. But in this outline, I just kind of have the basic 6 questions. So when you're writing out your process, if you're still not sure what your process is, or if you want to make sure you have all your bases covered, follow along with these 6 questions and write these out as specific as possible. And these are the questions. The first thing is, what is the first thing that should happen when a new lead comes in? So when they go in and they click business coaching, what's the first thing that happens after that? Write out all the steps that would happen once they come into the system. Number 2, what are the next steps to get them booked or onboarded? Do you have to jump on a call with them? Do you need to send out a questionnaire to get more information? Do you just go straight to proposal and send them out a quote? What are the next steps in order to get them locked in, so that in between phase before just coming into the system and getting a thank you email to them actually being booked? What's that in between phase? Write out what you do at that point in time. Then the next thing is, when do you consider the client being booked? What makes them a booked client in your process? Is it them signing the contract? Is it them paying a deposit? What is it that makes them a booked client in your it could be different for everybody. I've talked to people who it's the contract. Some people it's if they fill out a certain form. Other people it's if they pay the full amount or if they pay a deposit. What makes them a booked client in your process? Number 4, once the client is booked, so once they do that thing, what happens next? So write out everything that happens once they become a booked client. Then after that, when does your work with the client conclude? So what is it, those last steps that make it where, okay, I'm done with this project, this event, whatever the case may be, what is it that makes that work conclude? Write out the steps that happen there. And then the very last thing is, do you send any follow-ups after that project or that event is over? So do you send out like a birthday email or an anniversary email or something like that afterwards, or a 6-month check-in? Do you have any follow-ups after that you do as well? Write those out too. So as you can see in those 6 questions, that's initiation to completion. So there's basically 6 pockets, and you want to write out the steps that happen in each one of those pockets. And I know it sounds like a lot of work, but trust me, once you do this and you actually get to workflow, it will seem a lot less overwhelming by having everything written out in front of you. So you'll have a game plan on how you're going to build that workflow. So definitely check out that help article. It goes into more detail with each question. If you still have more questions on it, want to know more, jump into that help article and check that out, because Sam did an amazing job on it. Then the next thing, some important tips for writing out your process. So yes, it helps to know, okay, I need to write out my steps for this. I need to write out my steps for this, but I still have more questions. Well, some of these might help you out as well. So when you're writing out your process and when you're building your workflow, you're going to be doing 3 things, okay? You're going to be choosing what you want to do, what action you're doing. You're going to be choosing when that goes out, what's the trigger that's going to make that action happen. And you're also going to be selecting the content that goes out with that action. So a perfect example would be, I want to send an email and I want to send it 3 days before their project date. And this is the email that's going out to the client. When you're writing out your process, use this formula for writing your action steps out. I want to send a form, and you can even put what form it is. I want to send out my proposal immediately after they are done with the appointment. and then you can put in what, scheduler you're planning on sending out. If you write out your steps in that formula, that's going to translate a lot better when you go into workflow to build it, because that's how you're going to build it. So when you're writing out your steps, just think action, trigger, content, and write it out in that sequence. Action, trigger, content. Now, one thing I did for those of you who have downloaded this handout, this is a list of the different actions we have in Dubsado, and this is a list of the different triggers that we have. So when you're writing out your workflow, use these as a cheat sheet. Just say, okay, I want to send my contract after a certain form is completed, or I want to send a email if a form hasn't been completed. So understand what's available to you when you're writing out your workflows. Look through this list and say, okay, what do I want to do next? And what's going to be the trigger? And then you'll write what content goes out. So use this as a cheat sheet whenever you're going through and writing out your workflow, because then you'll see what's available to you. Sometimes people don't know that you can send out an email to a client if a certain form hasn't been completed. So use these to kind of plan out your workflows and write it in that formula: action, trigger, content. So hopefully that helps whenever you're writing it out. So do that for these 6 questions, and every single step, use action, trigger, content for those 3. Okay. So once we move past there, the last thing, and then I'll open it up for questions, is and this is the third thing. This is almost like a bonus, because this is really about planning out your workflows, but this is also kind of a bonus here, is to build your content. This is huge. I would say predominantly most of the people that I talk to, this is the area where they are lacking the most. So if anything, once you get your process written out, if you know your process, have it written out, building your content is going to be very important. The workflows in Dubsado are content dependent. And what that means is that let's say in this action list, I want to send a form out. It's going to say, what form do you want to send? And it will pull up a list of all the forms that you have in Dubsado. So if you don't have that form built, there's no way to select that form to go out. I know it sounds very elementary, but there's a lot of people, when they build their workflows, they forget, oh, I actually have to build my contract, because the workflow has to pull that contract into the workflow. So like I have here an example, if you don't have your questionnaire built in the system, you can't send it. So this is a space where a lot of people kind of, they push it to the side. I don't really need to build my content. I just want to get to the workflow. But if you don't have that stuff built beforehand, it's almost impossible. It is impossible to actually put that content into your workflow. So once you have your steps listed out, so you want to send an email as the first thing in your workflow. I want to send an inquiry email. Make sure you go into Dubsado in the canned email section, and I'll actually jump over there here really quickly. Make sure you go to the canned email section and put in your canned emails that you have. If you're going to send a form out, it's going to look at the forms that you have built and say, which one of these do you want to send out? So if you don't have your content built beforehand, once you get to your workflow, you're going to say, oh, I have to go back and build my proposal. I forgot to build that. Or, oh, I have to go get my contract done or write this email. So once you have your steps listed out, make sure you go in and build those things first, and then that will set you up perfectly to build a workflow. So, and I have it written out here, go through your written out steps and build any content you see on the list. This is a little bonus tip for you guys who are going through and building content. If you're sending any form, contracts, scheduler templates, if you're sending any attachment basically out to a client, questionnaires, proposals, you will need a canned email to go with that form. Because in Dubsado, a great base knowledge is you're always going to pick the form that you want to send first, and then you'll choose the email that goes with that form. So by that, I mean this. When you're building a workflow action and you say, I want to send a questionnaire out, you'll pick the questionnaire, and then it will say, what email do you want to use as the vehicle to send this questionnaire out? So if you have a questionnaire, write a questionnaire email to go with it. So that way, when you're in the workflow, you can say, okay, I want my questionnaire, and then I want my questionnaire email to go with it. So hopefully that makes sense. But any forms that you have, so if I'm on my form list and I know that I'm going to be sending out this package proposal to the client, I want an email in my canned emails that I would use to send out that proposal. So that's just a quick tip for you guys who are building content. If you have contracts in there that you need to send out or anything like that, just write an email that goes with it, and that'll help you when you get to the workflow portion. So quick recap, and then I'll open it up for questions. One, start with the lead captures and planning out where your workflows are going to start from your different lead captures. Maybe you just have one lead capture, totally fine. Other people might have multiples. Write all of those out and plan out how your workflows are going to start. Then write out your process in as vivid detail as you can and use the formula action, trigger, and content to write out your steps. That will help you when you get to the workflow, and you can use this as a cheat sheet. And then the last thing is look at the list of different action steps that you have. And if you want to, you can circle the content. There's an email here, there's a form here, there's a scheduler template here. Go in and then build all of those pieces of content. So when you get into the workflow, you'll be able to just click and choose, I want this scheduler, this questionnaire, and you'll have all that content in front of you. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys, and kind of gives you more clarity on how to properly plan out a workflow.